I was born an eighth-generation Georgian, 121 days after Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act in 1965. That means that I grew up in a South that was radically different from the one my white ancestors knew. And while the arc of our beloved region's history has bent towards justice over the course of my life, what it means to be Southern has changed too. So I want to find out, what does it actually mean to be Southern in this modern world, from ordinary women who make their little corner of the South a better place, who have bloomed where they were planted and have led extraordinary lives. So y'all grab a seat at the welcome table and join the conversation. We're delighted you're here. Hey, I'm Stacy with Down South House and Home, and this is my podcast, At the Welcome Table. So today we go over to Arkansas to talk with Adena White. Now, I found out that Adena White existed because I was sitting in Atlanta traffic and my Apple Podcast player randomly chose a podcast where she was featured. And the longer I listened to the podcast, the more I wanted to know her. So I reached out and she graciously said yes. So she has an initiative to record Southern voices just like I do. And I thought we should be in cahoots with one another. And so we get to sit down and talk for the very first time together. And I'm sure you will enjoy it. So if you like this podcast episode, please hit like, and if you like the whole series, hit subscribe, because we are coming out with stories as fast as we can, and we don't want you to miss anything. So grab a glass of tea, sit back, and get ready to listen to your new friend, Adena White.
Adena White, I am so happy to have you on my podcast. And thank you for making time to see us. It's like I was telling you on the phone the other day how I learned about you. And my husband had been on the podcast called Pull Up a Chair with Leo Cummings, the Thoid. And actually I had discovered him, and I said, I have got to get Chuck on Leo's podcast. I said, those two will talk each other into little greasy spots. And they did. And then, and the funniest thing is like, so I don't really have a lot of time to listen to podcasts. And so I was listening to one, and then my podcast player just randomly picked Pull Up a Chair with you as the guest. And so I thought, okay, I'll just listen to Leo Cummings to see what he's up to. And he started talking about this person, and he couldn't remember his name. And I realized it was my husband, from the previous episode. He goes, you got to meet this guy. And I'm like, I was yelling in my car in Atlanta traffic. I was going, Chuck Reece, and he finally figured it out like 5 minutes later in your conversation. But, when I was listening to you talk about what you're doing, I thought, she's doing exactly what I'm doing. We need to be friends. And so I thought, what better way to become friends than do a podcast together? So I thought, I'm going to get you on here. And we've talked a little bit, but I don't know that much about you. And I know you and I are going to be good friends because you're good people. And I want to find out what's going on in Arkansas, because we get a little, like, I live right outside of Atlanta. We get a little Atlanta centric. We don't, sometimes it's hard to get out in the South, and what you're doing in Arkansas is pretty cool. So
thank you.
I'm going to start off with my 3 questions. Who are you? Where are you from? And who are your people?
Okay. Well, who am I? I am Adena White, as we discussed. I was born and raised in Central Arkansas, still live here. I am a middle child. I have 2 sisters, and I've been married for, 17 years to my husband Matthew, and wow. we have a new kindergartner, almost 6-year-old, and we now have a miniature poodle that we got a month ago. And so
see,
yeah. And so I guess another part of who I am, by trade, I work in PR and communications. So I guess I'm a storyteller. So that's kind of what I do for my work, that we'll get into, I'm sure. And also, what else?
Who are your people?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, who are my people? Okay, what was the second one? Was that
Who
who are
are
my
you?
people?
Where are you from?
Oh,
And who? So Central Arkansas, right?
okay, I got those two together. Okay, who are my people? I think my people are, I like people who are curious, who are thoughtful. And I'll just name some examples of people. When I think of like, and they're both Southern actually, Brene Brown. I think these are, she's my people. I don't know her, but like just people like her who are thoughtful, authentic, things like that. By blood, my people are have a huge family, and my dad's side is pretty scattered because they were in the military. A lot of them. My mom's side is mostly still here in Arkansas, but a huge Black Southern family.
Yeah.
And I already mentioned like my family I live with, but yeah, so those are my biological people, but they're also my people. But just people who I just kind of just to fill me up are people who seem to be thoughtful and they think deeply. They're good listeners. I think those are the people that really I like to connect with. And I think you're going to be my people too. By the end of this, I think you're going to be my people.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
So you say you come from a big Southern family, and and I came from. I just had a brother, but there were 10 grandchildren, and we all had family. And like I always felt sort of overwhelmed by my family because there were a lot of really big personalities in my family, and it was just sort of. And I guess that's how I learned how to become a good listener, is because they were all like, they were all vying for attention, and I was just trying to stay out of the way.
Yes.
And so, I mean, what was your experience of being in a big family?
Yeah, in my household, there were just, me and my two sisters and my parents. So we didn't have that bigness, but like, my dad, he's one of 11 and my mom is one of 11. So like, I can't even count my first cousins. I have no idea how many first cousins I have. And it's so like, but when we get together, it's always, seems like there's a song's gonna break out. There's gonna be some singing. You like some kind of gospel singing and stuff, and that's always fun. So I think I am pretty introverted, but I do like small gatherings and stuff. But in general, I'm pretty introverted. But like, yeah, anytime like we can like do some line dances or like sing some gospel songs together at family gatherings, that's always my jam. Even though I'm kind of reserved. So
right,
yeah,
I'm introverted too. Yes, like I like people, just not all at once. And
that's it.
And they just, it kind of wears you out being around all those people, especially like the big personality types. And so I find it very troublesome. I can only do large gatherings for a short period of time.
Oh yeah.
But my family never did the whole fun line dancing, gospel singing. It was just it was all just one-upping each other and some barbecue. So it was.
Well, it's always good though. Barbecue's always good.
It's Southern. I mean, it's very Southern. So has your family been in Arkansas for a long time?
Yes. Actually, my husband does genealogy research. And he can tell you exactly when they came. But the county where I grew up in Arkansas, some of my ancestors migrated from, I think, Haywood County, Tennessee. He'll probably correct me if he hears this. But Tennessee is where they came from. But this was probably like, late 1800s. And then I think my dad's side, some of them came from Mississippi. I have some folks from South Carolina. But it was probably, I guess as far as settling down here, it was probably like in the 1800s, I believe.
Yeah.
So pretty long time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really long time.
Other places. Yeah.
Lots of roots. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't have, that kind of sense of place.
Oh, right. Right.
And it's like that's where you feel, like Georgia is where I feel myself. My family's, we're I'm 8th generation Georgian, it's like my family's been here, and I was like, I am Georgia, and you probably feel the same way. Like I am Arkansas. Yeah,
I do. Yeah.
You just like there's just no other place like that, especially when you got it like in your DNA, and and so you have got this. Tell me about this new project that not new project, but this project you're working on that you are developing.
It's called, the company's called Black Belt Media, and we produce a podcast.
It has the cutest logo.
Oh,
It
yes.
is.
I have my little cup right here if you can see
You
it.
have it?
I don't know if you can see it, but
It's a boll weevil. I mean, it's a cotton boll,
uh,
but it's the African hair or the
yes,
afro.
yes.
Yeah. And so I just think it is genius. And it just says you all over it.
Oh, yeah. It was a talented designer I've worked with for years. When I first had the idea, I went to her and I said, first we just drew up a quick logo for something else, but then for like when it was just gonna be a blog. But when we decided to like get more serious, make it a podcast, I said I want an afro and a cotton ball mixed together, and she just or bowl. I think I said it wrong. Anyway, she just whipped that up and it was perfect. And when it's in colors, like more like earth tones and stuff, lots of browns and tans and earth tones. But the project, it was 2017 when the idea came about, and the reason why was because, as you know, in 2016 we had a big election, and during the election season, I was getting pretty frustrated by the way people would talk about Black folks, which every election season you're going to have something come up. But that one in particular, whenever issues about Black people came up, generally, the candidate on the right would talk about Chicago. That would always be where he would go to talk about race, Chicago. And after the election, personally, it didn't go the way I wanted, but I was frustrated with people who were supposed to be on my team, who were bad-mouthing the South, talking about the South voted for Donald Trump and, let's throw the whole South away, just a bunch of backwards people. And that was frustrating because just like all Black people don't live in Chicago, the South has Black people there. Like, actually, most Black Americans live in the South, the majority of Black Americans. So I was getting frustrated because I felt like Black Southern stories weren't really being told. Our experiences weren't being told. We weren't part of the narrative about what it means to be Black or Southern.
Yeah.
So I wanted to tell those stories. As someone with a background in storytelling, I wanted to do more to share those stories. So I started off as a writer. I was going to make a blog about it. So I interviewed someone that I met through my job when I used to work for a Chamber of Commerce. She actually worked for a Chamber of Commerce in Tennessee. And in the chamber world, you do a lot of benchmarking trips. So like one chamber will go to another chamber, you'll learn from each other. So she and I were paired up as this communications people. And so I began following her. But after the election, she had kind of the same drive I did. She basically started a nonprofit to deal with voter disenfranchisement in Nashville, Tennessee. And so I was inspired by her, like using the election outcome to kind of do more, kind of like a Stacey Abrams type, but just in Nashville. So anyway, I wanted to talk to her. So we spoke over the phone, and I was going to write an article about her. And then she was talking. She was like, this great presentation. And she started getting emotional on one part. And I was like, oh man, I really want to convey these feelings that she's having. This would be great audio, but I don't talk. I'm an introvert. I don't want to do a podcast. So anyway, kind of put it on the back burner. And then my sister Katrina, she's a former TV producer, and she also works in PR. So she was going to help out with the blog and write as needed and stuff. So she was all in. And then I had another friend named Kara Wilkins who also was all in to help with the blog. Kara and I were having coffee, and then we were just talking about something, and she's just very extroverted. She was talking about like the cultural relevance of Beyonce and Jay-Z, and she's fun, and she's just a fun person. So as we were talking, I was like, hey, you know that Black Belt idea? And she was like, yeah. And I said, I'm thinking this should be a podcast. Would you be a co-host? And then she said, yeah, I will. So then Katrina and I were talking on the phone, and we always talk about like our hopes and dreams for our careers and personal development and stuff. And she said, I'm just a producer looking for a show, because she kind of, even though she didn't miss TV news, she kind of missed producing a show. And I said, oh, by the way, Black Belt is now going to be a podcast instead of a blog. Do you want to help out? And she said, oh yeah, sure. And so I told you about the logo, how that came together. Katrina, my sister's husband, my brother-in-law, is a talented musician. I told him I kind of wanted like lift every voice and sing with some trap music as part of the song. So he whipped that up. And then our podcast launched in September of 2019. And so that was a long time between like the initial idea to the launch of the podcast. But like it was an idea that was brewing, and then finally we got it out there. And You can stop me whenever you need. I know I'm gonna keep
No,
going
no,
for it.
no, I love it. Yeah.
So then we released a few episodes in January. I was listening to a different podcast I like called Side Hustle.
January of
2020, right before
2020.
COVID.
Okay. Right.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. All right.
Okay. So I was listening to a podcast I like called Side Hustle Pro, and she helps people, start side hustles. And,
Yeah.
her side hustle was a podcast. And she was talking about how she was upset that Apple didn't mention her in like the best entrepreneurial podcast. And she made a point to say, well, I didn't ask. And I was like, oh, I can ask Apple for stuff. So then, I found the email address online, and I just requested that we be in like the Black History section for Black History Month.
Oh.
And so I forgot about the email. I can't remember if I got a response or not. But one day, me and Katrina, my sister, and Kara, we were meeting on MLK Day actually to talk about the podcast. And then I pulled in my phone to look something up, like when our last episode was released, and I saw our logo on the new and noteworthy section. And I kept staring at it. And I was like, "Why is this here?" I couldn't make sense of it. And then I realized, like, oh my gosh, we're new and noteworthy, because I made them all check their phones to see if it was I tripping, but it was actually.
We need to ask.
Yeah.
Southern women are never taught to ask.
We're supposed
to be awarded. We're supposed to be observed and awarded when it's our time.
And they gave me beyond what I even thought to ask for. Like, I didn't ask to be new and noteworthy. I just wanted to be in the Black section,
Yeah.
But and I think a woman who I connected with, her name maybe it's Stacy too, but she, I think she was a Southerner, so I think she kind of like.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of liked what she saw, and then I think she helped elevate it. So that was really cool. And then, as you know, the rest of 2020 got a little crazy, just a little bit. And in the summer of that year, we remember George Floyd was murdered, and we also had Breonna Taylor was killed, and Ahmaud Arbery was killed. And so there was, we had that racial reckoning that was going on. So
the world was on fire.
It was on fire in so many ways, yes. And then so we were on not hiatus. We did our season from like September through February, and we took a break. And then so Apple reached back out, that contact I had, and she asked, if y'all gonna release any new episodes, we would like to do a regional. We like to do the regional perspective about what's going on. And then I said, yes, we already have one we're working on. So we released that episode, and Apple elevated us in like different categories, like Juneteenth, Black Culture Matters, and all this stuff. And then next thing we know, the Oprah magazine features us in like maybe, I don't know, 8 podcasts to make you smarter or to feel your expand your knowledge. And then Vanity Fair put us on a list of like some top Black podcasts about Black history. So those were like some big national attention that we got less than a year to launch that we didn't expect. And the timing was right, of course. I mean, I don't want to say right because that's a hard word, but like the timing helped elevate Black voices during that time. But also even in January before everything happened, I think they liked what they heard, like we're doing, some people authentic and who they are and where they come from, just talking, getting behind the mic,
Yeah.
And so that's kind of been our journey so far, and we're looking to, we took a little break for a while, about a year and a half, and now I'm trying to get back into it and really hone down on what we're all about. So.
Like I had started at the Welcome Table podcast in, I think, 2018, 2019, and I'd gotten 3 or 4 episodes. I split one into 2 episodes, so I'd gotten like 3 guests, and that was like, I have a little barn in my backyard where I do all of my things, and that was, we just had a Yeti microphone and across the table, and you could hear everybody like knocking, like every creak of the chair and all of that. But it was kind of like all we had at that point. It's like the technology for doing this just wasn't really there. And then the pandemic happened, and so sitting across the table from anybody has just gone. And I just didn't have the ability to reach out to people on over the computer or whatever. That was beyond me at the time. And then and so I am just now getting back up again, and like I'd recorded 1 episode in Januay, and it took me until June to get it released. And then but yeah, and then but now that I've gotten it released, I did one with a Jackie Trimble, who's this wonderful poet in Alabama. I just got that released, and then I've done 2 interviews today. You're one of them.
Oh, awesome.
So it's going, but it's just kind of like getting the momentum up to do that. It's really hard, especially, I think it's just like we're just kind of I think men have an easier I'm just gonna say I think white men have an easier time getting podcasts. I say that. And it's like getting, just being women from the South. I just don't think there's a lot of like encouragement for that. It's like I think we're kind of in like a new sort of genre. Like we're celebrating Southernness that is not like full of redneck nonsense.
Yeah, right. Because we're not used to hearing voices like ours on the airwaves. Like whether it's country or Southern or a black scent or a combination of the 3. Sometimes we're not used to hearing that. So I think the more people we have speaking, the more people will be encouraged to share their own stories and use their own voices.
And I'm feeling you on the whole, like, take a hiatus and like getting it back up and running. And also in the meantime, my husband and I launched our sister company, Salvation South. So it's not like I wasn't busy, and I'm sure you were doing all sorts of stuff too. It's just sometimes getting the priority of what's important to you out the door. Sometimes I think as Southern women, we're taught to put that as a lower priority, and so we don't push it as hard as we need to push it.
Yeah, right. And despite the podcast having that success and actually opening doors for me, like when it comes to like, people taking notice for consulting projects, and then I think it helps me get some visibility in Arkansas, just to be like, oh, we trust her to help us with this communication stuff. Even still, it's easy to put it aside because it just feels like it's not important, because it's like, oh, I'm just talking. But like, this is like storytelling, and these conversations are what kind of inspire change. I mean, they're what makes things happen. But we discount that sometimes because it doesn't feel like work. I guess it doesn't feel important.
And it's yours. I mean, it's just like your little hobby.
Right.
I just feel like it's my it's
cute.
It's a cute little podcast. It's a women's issues thing. But I think part of the reason why I want to do this is I say in my intro, I was born in 1965, the same year as the Voting Rights Act. And so I grew up in a very different South than my white ancestors. I'm 8th generation Georgia, and all the bad things that white people did to black people in the South, Exhibit A, right? And so I feel like we are, like, I was on the other side of that whole civil rights voting rights law that changed everything. Not overnight, but it changed. Right. And I feel like we need to, remember or talk to people and record the stories of the people who do remember the before times, because I think that there's this current sort of daydream or a longing for 1962, and actually I did see, I think one of the germ of this idea is like, I was talking to this wealthy, influential old white man, and he said, and he has, like everything going for him. And he says, I wish we could go back to 1962. And I was like, why is it 1962? And I was like, oh, that's right. Women couldn't have credit cards. Black people knew their place, and everything was great for them. And I feel like we're starting to get like this reimagination of what it was like in the good old days.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we have these conversations. Like, you and I don't know that South.
Right.
But I know the stories from that South because I'm older than you, and it's like I heard people reminisce about those old days, and they weren't good for women and black people. And I mean, they were great for white men and the women who loved them. And and so I feel like it's like keeping these stories while, like making sure that we talk to people who remember what it was like, so that we know not to do it again.
Oh, right.
Because it's it's hard to, for just these ordinary people in Arkansas or Louisiana who have those experiences and remember what it was like. They don't have a platform, and I think you're giving a lot of the women who are men and women who have those stories, and I'm certainly going to be competing for those stories too, because I think it's important that we have that dialogue between white Southerners and black Southerners and everything else, because it's like people from outside the South, they don't understand us. And, we might fight amongst each other because we're kin, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
But don't y'all come in here and tell us anything, because no, we're not going to have that. And I feel like you have that same sense, like, we're not going to do that.
I really do. Especially, I think as a progressive, when I hear progressives from, as some people call them, blue state liberals, talk about places like the South in like negative, condescending ways. I'm like, you're kind of doing the same thing that you think we do down here, the looking down on people and all that stuff, because it's very classist. A lot of it is actually racist too, because as we talked about, the diversity of the South. The reason why we have so many of these issues with that deal with race is because we have a diverse population down here. So people are going to create laws that that make it harder for, immigrants to vote and for black people to, and redistricting and stuff like that, because we have this diverse population. So so when people think that, I can never live there, but it's like, well, you'll be living around a bunch of cool people. I mean, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, we have all types of people who live here. So when people act like that, when they question, then listen, they can't live there. It's kind of like, well, what are you saying about the rest of us? Like, there's people moving here in droves. Like, it's a good place to be. We just have issues just like everywhere else,
When I was talking to the poet Jackie Trimble, who lives in Alabama, she says, we talk about racial issues in the South more than because the other parts of the country, they got the same racial issues too. When I went up to Pittsburgh to graduate school in the 90s, they used a lot of racial epithets, and and they had segregated neighborhoods. They were just segregated by ethnicity, like where they choose to live. But one of the things I noticed when I was up in Pittsburgh, and I went to Pittsburgh in 1991, so this was a long time ago. I noticed that black people were more equal, but they were more separate. And in the South, they were less equal, but less separate. Like I did not see people making friendships across that color line, and or knowing somebody, and that was black. And in the South, I mean, I didn't understand the inequality that was part of my relationship with any black person that I met, but I had fond feelings for some black people that I had in my life, and I didn't realize how unequal the relationship was, but I didn't see that in Pittsburgh. And and there was so there was a lot of racial divides up there too that I think was pretty much unaddressed. And I think here you and I are having this conversation right now, and we do it in a way that's constructive and hopefully forthright.
Yes, and what you said reminded me of an article. It was actually published 10 years ago. I'm seeing now. I just Googled it. But it's from the Washington Post, and it's from 2014. And they said that three quarters of white people don't have any non-white friends, and that's all over the United States. And so it just shows you how segregated our entire nation is, by neighborhood and stuff like that. And even if it's not intentional, you probably didn't choose your home, but because of that reason, you end up going to a school that's that way, your church, so it becomes to where you don't have any connection. So that was actually an article from the Washington Post back in 2014 that I think Code Switch podcast kind of brought to my attention, which is you don't think that, I mean, that would be the case in 2014, and of course not today, but it is all over the country.
Yeah, and I, one of the things that Jackie Trimble said is that like we have our own biases, we have our preferences of who we want to be around, and that's just sort of innate. We don't think about it, and I think it does take a conscious effort to cross any cultural or racial divide, but usually when you do it, you find out great things. There's generally a positive benefit to making that step. But I think like our natural decisions are to be with people who are like us, more like us, and we feel more comfortable that way. And I think that's and so I think we always have to take that into consideration when we're talking about that sort of stuff. But it's also like when I was growing up, I was thinking that white people and black people were really different. And then when I went to Pittsburgh, I realized we were just different in skin tone, because we liked the same foods, we had the same churches, we were really the same. It's like it was leaving the South that made me realize that I was not any different from my other Southern sisters and brothers. And but it took leaving the South before I realized how much all of us have in common. We in the South, there seems to be like this big divide, but there was like culturally we do a lot of things that are the same.
Yeah.
And there's not as much difference, I think, as we think there is.
Oh yeah, I think you're right about that for sure.
So and also you mentioned code switching, and it's like, so tell me about code switching. What is that?
Well, the podcast I mentioned was NPR's Code Switch. That's where I saw that article. But it's such a clever name because they get it from the thing that people do when they change the way their voice sounds or what they talk about around certain groups of people. And so that NPR Code Switch is a podcast about race and identity. And so it's a neat topic. It's a neat title for that show because they dive into like issues of race for people all over the world. So it's mostly America. It's race in America, but like, people all over.
Because I had been talking to some people in Appalachia, and they were talking about how they code switch. And when I went to Pittsburgh, people thought I was stupid because I had a Southern accent, and I would shake people's hand when I was introduced to them, and they were like, "I don't know, why are you shaking my hand?" and so I learned to code switch. So I learned to turn off my Southernness, in unfamiliar situations. And these Appalachian writers were talking about how they turn off their Appalachian accent, and I feel like the whole the South has become trained to do the code switch, and it's not just it's not just it's not a black thing. It's like everybody is trying not to be perceived as they are, because what they are is not good enough.
Oh yeah.
And I think that you're coming from a place of fear of judgment, and I find that code switching is something that you do in order to feel like you can survive. And so tell me about your experience with code switching.
Well, the school I went to, it was a country school. So I graduated with 32 people in a small rural school district. So there I definitely did. Like even though we were all, socioeconomically the same and like the same stuff, I cheered for the same team, but I felt like I had to tone down my blackness in front of my white school friends more than I did like at home or at church or around family. Which I think we all have different versions of ourselves. But I remember one guy, it was at a basketball game, he asked me, "Why do you talk like that?" Like, and I didn't know what he was talking about, but it was maybe he thought I was trying too hard. Like maybe he noticed the code switch and he pointed it out. It was a weird question, but it was an offensive question. But I think it was. I still wonder, was it about the code switch or about just my natural voice, or maybe I was comfortable. I don't know what happened, but I think about that sometimes. But yeah, so that was a neat experience. And as someone who didn't talk much, it was when someone tells you that, it makes you want to just clam up a little more.
Yeah.
And I even remember probably my 10th grade year or so. I mean, I was coming out of my shell a little bit more. I was talking more, and I was in a computer class, and I was talking, and then the teacher said, "Adena, your voice carries," and that was really a blow too, because she didn't say, you're too loud. It's kind of like your voice carries, and it made it sound like, oh, like the sound of it, and that just made me very self-conscious about it. But now I'm like, my sister gave me an idea, like if I ever wrote a book, that would be the title, and they would talk about, I would reclaim it to mean like, inspiring people to use your voice for like to tell your story and things like that, and that kind of associate with the work that I do. But it was that's something else that stuck with me, and so it's just those are the two examples. But yeah, it happens all the time, and I think we all do it in a professional setting, but when your whole social existence is kind of around that can be a little exhausting for people, when they're always having to do that,
Yeah, I have a loud, clear voice too. And when somebody tells you your voice carries, it sounds like, like it's made, like it's got mass, it's like it's overwhelming people. Yeah. And if you're an introvert, you're like, oh, I was like,
right.
But it's like my natural voice is just loud, and you can hear it on the other side of the room. And but that is sort of something that you have to feel like. Could like I think in the South too, we're also like women are not supposed to draw attention to themselves, and I wonder if that teacher would have said your voice carries to a boy, because boys' voices are supposed to carry,
Don't you just love listening to Adena? We're going to get back to our conversation in just a minute, but first of all, I'd like to show you how we support ourselves. We don't ever want to put our content behind a paywall, so we make Southern home goods with clean, classic designs. You can find them at downsouth.house, and we have tea towels, dinner napkins, cocktail napkins, onesies, all kinds of things. But here's just a few. This is our Peace Be With Y'all napkin. It's great for any Episcopalian that you know, but just also with any Southerner. They are big, thick cotton napkins. They're 20 inches by 20 inches. They'll fit on Uncle Ernie's lap with no problem, we promise, and they wash up clean. You can bleach them and use them over and over again. And we also have some cocktail napkins. We've got dozens of these with clean, fun designs. Y'all come eat. Give me some sugar. We also have Give Me Some Sugar on a onesie. It is the cutest thing, y'all. So let's get back to Adena, and thanks for listening.
Like, where did you go to college?
It's a state school called Arkansas Tech University in Arkansas. So it was about, from where I grew up, is about a 45-minute drive. And then where I live now is about a, 35-minute drive from where I grew up. So I've been in this little radius, my entire life. Mm-hmm. So, but the college experience, it was, it wasn't, I say it was similar, but like for me, coming from the school I came from, where I was one of two Black students who graduated in that class of 32, when I went to Arkansas Tech, I was like, "Ooh, there's a lot of Black people here." But the Black people,
HBCU,
no, not at all. No. So like, it's so like for me, it was like, okay, we got some Black folks here. But then when I got to know the Black people there who came from, Little Rock, South Arkansas, places where they weren't in the minority that much, they were like, "Man, there's no Black people here." It's so like for them, like that 6% was like. I mean, that could tell, but like from my lens, I was like, oh wow, there's more Black people here than my cousins. It was, so it's weird how your own background kind of informs that. And as I'm older now, I can see those things, but as a new college student, for me, it was just like, man, I can't count them all on one hand. That I don't know all their parents, so it was that was interesting because you kind of see you start seeing divides based on. Race and geography, and then you see more of that socioeconomic differences coming in. where it's like, oh, I didn't go to school with any doctors' kids. Like, I mean, I didn't go to school with lawyers' kids. You know, the people whose parents were teachers were kind of like the well-off ones. It wasn't. So you kind of see those different divides. And when I meet students who were like, oh, I'll ask them if they were freshmen. They're like, yeah, technically I'm a freshman, but because of the AP classes I took, I have 24 hours. And I'm like, AP classes? We didn't have AP classes. So it's like, and maybe they do now at the school I went to, but it's just, you don't realize how behind you are. And I hate to say it like that way, and not in an insulting way. Like, I'm proud of where I came from, but then I feel like I had a lot of catching up to do. And like, it was compounded some years later, like when it comes to like, not only just academic knowledge, but like racial knowledge and just like, you know, being a first generation college student on top of being, it was just like, you realize you just feel behind, and then you feel kind of, it affects your confidence a little bit.
Yeah, because I lived right outside of Athens, and Athens is sort of like, Athens, Georgia is where the University of Georgia is. So it's just a little pocket of, you know, sophistication in the hinterlands, you know, and I was in a little rural county right outside of Athens, and literally boys would drive to school with their hunting rifles in the back of their gun rack.
Oh, wow.
You know, and so that they could go straight from school to the deer stand, right? And so, like, so that, you know, it was convenient, and nobody thought anything about it. I mean, they didn't bring the gun in, I guess, unless they were going to show their shop teacher that, but I mean, their gun or whatever. But it was like, nobody ever thought anything about boys bringing guns to school, you know, because nothing bad was ever going to happen. And so I think there were maybe 150 students in my class. And then I went to the University of Georgia, where there was 25, at that time, there was 25,000 students there. Wow. And it was just like, and like you, we didn't have AP classes, or if we, you know, and, you know, like, and even though I was 20 miles away from Athens, it was like a world away. And I felt like I felt like a hick, you know, and I was trying not to be a hick around all these sophisticated people, or, you know, sophisticated people who, you know, doctors and lawyers, children, because my mother was a school teacher, and we were sort of like the, you know, schooler of the community, you know, like, yeah, because I mean, I had to like behave because my mother was a teacher, because we had an elementary school, middle school, and a high school, and we were supposed to, you know, uphold the family name, and so, you know, I didn't really have, you know, any doctors' kids or lawyers' kids, you know, and I mean, there were fine middle class, you know, families, they were wonderful people, but they just weren't, like, you know, I was not running into the children of millionaires.
Yeah, it's like a TV show type thing. Like, yeah, I mean, it feels like a TV situation at that age. Like, I didn't know anyone who was like a doctor, who had or MD, you know? Yeah. So it was just, I mean, besides the one I went to, but I didn't know their family. I just didn't have that in my world. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was, I felt really, you know, like I felt really insecure when I went to college, because I went from like being sort of like a big fish in a small pond. You know, I was the child of a teacher. My family was, you know, relatively more affluent than the rest of the other kids. You know, I got a new car when I was 16 and was a majorette. So I was like, I was on top of the food chain, you know, and then when I went to college, I was like way down here, you know, or I felt way down here, because I realized I was out of my element, and that can be they can be very traumatic, you know, in to a young person, you know, when they go through that. And it sounds like you kind of had that same sort of traumatic event.
But yes, but in a way that doesn't make you want to prove yourself, though. You have a little chip on your shoulder. Yeah. So like, I didn't know to call it a chip on my shoulder until the Chamber of Commerce I worked at in Conway, Arkansas. I worked there that's where I worked with Leo. I worked there for 11 years. And the CEO of that chamber is also from a small town. He went to school at the university here in Conway, the University of Central Arkansas. So the story of Conway, you have a lot of people like us coming from these small towns, going to school at UCA or Arkansas Tech, which is just right down the road, and then settling in Conway. Because like for us, that's the big city. It's a city of about 70,000 now. And so that's a big city, and you find a good job there and stuff like that. You do start meeting doctors and stuff that you kind of, that you know.
Yeah.
But so he always described this like he has a chip on his shoulder, but he framed it in a way that made me accept it a little more than I used to. Like instead of kind of hiding from that or being ashamed, he would be like, that's why I like to compete, and I like to show people for now what Conway is all about. And for him personally, it's kind of like that my school is just as good as like the University of Arkansas, like the school I went. So he always had that chip, and he said, you have a chip on your shoulder too. And I'm like, yeah, I do. But I never saw it like that, but I do. And I think the podcast, when I think about it, the podcast I started with a chip on my shoulder. Like it's telling the stories of Black Southerners because they are talking about it enough. Here's what we're made of.
Let me
chip on your shoulder.
You.
I think as Southerners, I think we all have a chip on our shoulder. Some of us use it to like lift up our voices and to show that we are inclusive and people could belong here. Others use it to kind of put other people down and and build walls. So like you can use that chip on your shoulder for different ways. So yeah.
And I think like you and I probably both see something that's wrong. It's like I'm gonna fix this. You know, it's like I'm gonna get up in there and I'm gonna fix it.
Right.
And
yes.
I don't care what I have to do.
Let me get my mic. I'm gonna fix this.
You come in. And that was my like I heard you and I was like, you come on. I'm gonna talk to you.
Let's fix this. Let's talk. Yes, I love it. We should make a podcast called A Chip on My Shoulder.
Exactly. And and another thing I wanted to ask you is like you were first generation to go to college, right? Is that what you told me?
Yeah. It's kind of, since my family's so big, I can't speak for all the branches, but like in my own, with my parents, and then like most of my aunts and uncles, some went, but most of them did not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Grandparents definitely didn't. Yeah.
What was that like for you?
At the time you don't think anything about it. Like now, I feel like universities are really pushing the first generation student experience. They're making like clubs about it, and they're really like naming that.
Really?
But when I was in college, the two here, I've seen like a billboard even about the first generation, and so like I feel like they're recognizing it more. But when I was in school, I didn't know that name until later, probably. But like the way it looked though is that my cousin, just like a good Southern family, I have double cousins. So like sisters married brothers. So like my mom and my aunt are sisters, and my dad and uncle are brothers. Brothers.
Yeah.
They have 4 kids. We had 3. So the 7 of us are double cousins. So the first of my double cousins, one of the older ones who went to college, she went to college at Arkansas Tech. And so my sister went to Arkansas Tech. And then I applied to about 3 schools, and I chose Arkansas Tech. And then my cousin below me went there. And then like maybe 2 more different branches. So it's like, I don't think we all consciously like, we're going to follow each other, but like it made us more comfortable to go there because we knew people there. So I think, Arkansas Tech got a lot of Black students from Conway County back between 2004 through 2010 or so.
Because I think you can mentally see the path, and, because my parents went to the University of Georgia, and I was thinking about like maybe going somewhere else, and they said, no, you're going to go to the University of Georgia. Because I think it was like, they knew that, like they, right. I was not going to go off onto some other school. I was going there, and but it's like you had family that had made the pathway there, and like they know the building that you're supposed to go to,
right,
to pay the tuition. Like it's not like an unfamiliar territory.
Yeah, so I think that's how it looked for me, because like, I didn't plan any college tours. I applied for colleges. And this is how. I don't think my family, we weren't poor or anything, but I didn't like asking for money. So like, I remember the University of Arkansas required like a $25 application fee. And I was like, oh man, I didn't want to apply because it had an application fee. And then the other 2 I applied to didn't. But even I thought it'd be more convenient too for my mom if like me and my sister both went there. Like it was kind of like I think that was in the back of my mind too.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed my experience, but like I didn't know to go to my school counselor and take college tours. I didn't do that. I mean, I tried to go to a big a timeout for tech event for all incoming students or prospective students, but like I didn't schedule to college tours. I didn't even dare apply out of state. I just didn't know. Like it wasn't like people were stopping me. You just don't know what you don't know. And so because my parents didn't go through it, it's like they didn't know what to tell me. And then I went to a small school, so that counselor was probably like, at my graduating class, probably about, not many of us went to like a 4-year university, which, now we know more about the trades are just as important as like a 4-year college degree. But, then it's kind of like they celebrate that a lot from where I come from. But then when you get older, you realize like, oh, people crap on state schools? I had no idea. And we're like, people, you see these things, we're like, oh, my school, you're proud of yourself for doing this. Then you realize like, oh, I'm still like not where
I know
people think is good enough,
Doesn't that break your heart? Because you think, oh, I've done this thing, and then somebody goes, oh, it was just that, and that just, it's, and I've really done that to people too, and I feel, and I was like, I wish I could go back and tell them if I remember who they were, I'd go back and say I was sorry, because, it's like, it's what?
I was going to say, is it the curse of knowledge? But go ahead. What you were saying.
It was the curse of knowledge.
Well, I think when you forget about a time you didn't know something.
Yeah.
And then actually Brene Brown had a story about this. She was at some fancy party. Her husband's a pediatrician, and maybe there was some med school party. And then she was eating this little thing from an appetizer tray. And she said something like, oh, these are great. What's this called? And someone said, edamame. And she was like, okay. But so anyway, she fell in love with edamame, and she started buying it. She was eating it in her office when she became a professor. So it was years later. So she was eating this edamame. A student comes in. They're like, oh, what are you eating? And I think she was kind of annoyed by this student or something. And she said, yeah, edamame.
Edamame.
In the same snobby way was sold to her. And we do that. Like we know how it feels to be talked to that way, but then we turn around and do it to someone else.
Because we think it's going to make us feel good.
Right. And we forgot what it's like not know. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. And I think that's I think the whole, a lot of the Southern culture is about who's higher, we're always trying to figure out who's above who. And, and we hate feeling less than, and we'll always want to be the one looking down. And what we realize is that it's all fueled by the same fear, yes. And when we make our lives about looking down, you never come from a place that's secure and confident. That's not confidence. But it took me a long time because that was just like what everybody did, everybody judged each other. And it took me a long time to figure out how toxic that is and how harmful it is, just your daily life. But yeah, it's like, I used to be really, really snobby and try to look down on lots of people because I felt less than many times, and I never wanted to feel that way again. So I wanted to push other people down. And, and it's kind of like, I'm really glad I don't do that anymore. But But it is a product. I'm just a product of our culture, and that's what we do.
Yeah, it's so easy to do it too, and I think that you may not realize it's happening until you reflect. You're like, oh, I was kind of that happened to me, and I remember not knowing that fact, and then once I learned it, I started getting real snobby about it.
It's edamame,
right? That story, it was like, yeah.
And you can put the snarky, in edamame. It's edamame,
right? And the person into her probably just found out what it was 2 years before that,
Okay, listen. All right, I have kept you. I feel like you and I need to talk more because, but it's Friday, and so let me ask you a couple things. Okay. What advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good question. Trying to think when I was in college. I guess I would tell her, you have time you don't have to figure it all out before you're 25 or 30 or even 40. Say even 40 because I'm knocking on the door. So it's like, there's time. You don't have to rush it. I guess be yourself. And I feel like I was myself, but then there's sometimes I can look back and be like, and wonder if I was or not. And then, I think, I guess just you have time and like you don't have to have it all figured out. You never will. And I have to remind myself of that now too, because you feel like sometimes you look back, it's like, man, I'm almost 40 and I don't have my dream house yet, right? I'm not driving my big luxury car. So it's kind of like, you still have those little nagging things, but just kind of like, your worth. I mean, I guess a lot of things I would tell her, your worth isn't in like where you grew up or where you went to school. I know you can celebrate that stuff, and maybe you can separate from it.
I still have that. I'm 20 years older than you, and I still have the exact same. I say that exact same thing to myself, and we got to stop.
Yeah,
it's because you don't take it with you anyway. So all right. So what would you tell a 21-year-old girl now, a woman now, and living in this day and age?
Yeah,
is anything different?
Gosh, and they have it so much. It's so much more complicated for them because they have social media to compare themselves to. In some ways, they're a little more informed because they don't have to get an encyclopedia out to figure something out. They can go on Google. They can see what their Instagram friends are doing. But I think for them, maybe the same thing, be true to yourself, because unlike me, I didn't have access to certain things or knowledge about certain things, so I didn't know what I didn't know. But for them, there's so much information out there, so they can easily adapt or try to be like their favorite influencer or, things like that and not be true to themselves. So I think the same thing, be true to yourself, especially with all the noise they have. They have a lot more noise to filter through. And
I think these young people are looking at influencers who don't have it any more together than they do. Mm-hmm. They just look like it because it's all curated. Like they do have more access to information, but some of it is just not real, not grounded in reality. And I think, they're having, with their young brains, having to filter out the BS. I mean, because I think what we grew up with had already come through a lot of filters and a lot of, a lot of doors, had to be open for like certain information to get to us. And now, like, whatever is just accessible to everybody. And how do you filter out what's true and what's not? So what are your hopes for your children, your children?
Oh, child.
Okay, yeah.
And I have nieces and nephews, two nieces. I mean, no, one niece and one nephew too. And no way, actually more than that. I'm sorry. I just counted my sister's kids. Please forgive me, my husband's side's family. Yes, I have a total of 5 nibblings, nieces and nephews.
Nibblings?
So, I guess my hope for them is that, I said, don't forget where they came from, but they also don't be afraid to spread their wings. Yeah. I think going back to my 21-year-old self, I think I was a little afraid of that. I was afraid to get too far away. Like, I mean, if I had known what HBCU was, I probably would have applied for one. but like, or even just like, and I would come home on the weekends and do the minutes as Sunday school secretary, which, I had to come home every weekend, but like, I didn't leave the nest very well. I stayed at my family church, which I love, but I stayed there a long time.
Yeah.
Because, family is important to me, and where I come from is important to me, so I felt like separating from that would have me lose a piece of myself. And, it is hard, but it also, I think you can be yourself and be true to who you are and love where you come from, but you also can find where you fit too. So like, branch out, but then come home if you need to, but also like just explore, find out about other people, places, all that stuff. I think I'll tell them that, we'll miss you, but like just
come home.
Yeah, come home, but like just explore too,
Yeah.
and then to spread what's good about you everywhere so people can see more
Yeah.
Southerners or,
Yeah.
and just know that we have good people out here. But maybe doesn't mean we're physically leaving, but like even if it means just reading more
Mm-hmm.
and like, reading more books, traveling or moving,
Yeah.
whatever it takes. Just get out there. Yeah.
Well, they've got a good role model in you. So,
Oh, thank you.
well, I really appreciate you spending your Friday afternoon with me, and I think you and I are on the verge of doing big things.
Yes.
And I'm looking forward for us to having our voices carry a long way.
Yes. It's so great to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm so glad that we had the chance to make a new friend in Adena White. She is just wonderful. She's definitely a down south kind of woman. She's tenacious. She has vision. And most of all, she blooms where she is planted. So if you like this episode, we ask that you hit like. And if you want to hear more, hit subscribe. We are coming out with more interviews with ordinary Southern women with extraordinary lives just as fast as we can. So if you hit subscribe, you'll always get that notification. All right, that's enough for this week. So just remember, y'all, it doesn't matter whether it's set with china or chinette. Every table is a welcome table when it's set with love. See you soon. Love y'all.